So we've spent hours poring over our card pool to build that perfect deck. Finally honed and balanced with just the right synergies. We've posted on Facebook and we've posted on Reddit to check our deck list for feedback. We've spent days ruminating over other alternative cards and choices. Yes, we're finally happy with our creation. All that's left is to draw that random basic weakness. And as we draw that final card, our heart sinks as we contemplate the many ways that this single card is going to wreck everything at just the wrong moment. Welcome to Out of Ammo, Out of Time. I'm Krabby Terror 8, and today we're counting down the top 10 basic weakness cards we fear the most. Now, this is based on a Facebook and a YouTube poll I conducted, so it's not just my opinions, but I'm keen to hear what you think. And while you're at it, hit that like and subscribe button. I really appreciate it. Anyway, let's get into it with number 10, Paranoia. A basic weakness staple since the early days. Surely everyone's drawn a good old Paranoia at some time or other. What's that noise, you ask? It's the sound of all your resources draining away before your very eyes. This is the kind of card which you sometimes can shrug off easily. I'm looking at you, rogues. I'm looking at you, seekers. Or it can seriously hinder your game and leave you staring at a hand of awesome cards and no way to play them. This can leave you with a time tax as you draw new resources, or it means your investigator flails around with no assets on the table for a while. Either way, it can be a real pain, especially in resource-hungry decks, which rely on expensive allies and weapons and spells to fuel the fire. One solution is to ensure you're not hoarding resources, because you and I both know as soon as you do that Paranoia has the uncanny ability of popping out. Just remember that during the upkeep phase you draw a card first, then you gain a resource. So if you draw Paranoia, you immediately discard all resources, but then you gain one. So there's a small glimmer of hope. Yeah? Speaking of glimmer of hope against despair, we move on to 9, Dark Pact. Yes, Dark Pact, a campaign-only basic weakness. Dark Pact is by itself a challenging card to draw. It costs 2 resources and 2 damage to yourself or your fellow investigators or your allies. And if this pops up at the start of a scenario, it's less of a hassle. But a late game draw of a Dark Pact can be a real problem for the team. Do we trigger Dark Pact and let people get defeated? Or do we move on and risk price of failure being in someone's deck for the next scenario? Because the price of not dealing with Dark Pact can be very devastating indeed when the next scenario hits and it gets drawn and deals a massive 2-2 and adds a doom to the current agenda. That can be a game ender right there. Thematically on point, this is nevertheless the kind of basic weakness that can leave many of us thinking twice at indiscriminate card draw. Now, speaking of drawing, here is number 8. Drawing the Sign. Yes, Drawing the Sign. One of those take 2 actions and rid me of this thing cards. Drawing the Sign can either be a minor annoyance or a big deal depending on your investigator. This is a weakness that investigators like Safina and Harvey, for example, don't want to draw, as it can seriously limit their ability to draw and retain cards in their hand. For others, they'll wear it and get on with their lives, no problem. Note that this card's been errated, so that the text now reads your maximum hand size is reduced by 5. So, no big deal for some, but dread curse for others. Speaking of which, here's number 7. Yes, Dread Curse, a newcomer to the basic weakness universe. Dread Curse is a swift kick to the chaos bag, shifting the statistics to the side of failure. At best, Dread Curse means that you'll overcommit to skill tests to manage the downside, and at worst you're going to fail 1 or 2 tests, so you better hope they're not critical ones. The other thing about Dread Curse is that it doesn't just affect you, but the whole team, so expect some side-eye dirty looks from your fellow players on this one. And if you play on the mystic side of the street though, and you thought Promise of Power was a great idea, think again. Drawing this as a weakness will leave you cursing the gods of random chance and their perverse sense of humour. Which leads us to number 6, a card that I especially dislike, Indebted. Yes, Indebted, one of those unique weaknesses that divides opinions. Some see it as no more than a mere inconvenience. Others have banned it from the game entirely. First of all, Indebted is a permanent, so it kicks in every game, no matter what, and for some that takes away the random element of ever drawing a basic weakness in the first place. Secondly, it hits you hardest at the time when you need resources to get going. And if you're a mystic or a guardian or someone reliant on getting their assets and allies out early, Indebted at the very least means you need 2 actions to get back to where everyone else is just starting. On the upside, as some argue, it's 1 less weakness in your deck to draw, and for those decks which are asset light, survivor decks like Preston Dark Horse decks, that kind of things, Indebted is worth the hassle and can be a boon to gameplay. Where you fall on Indebted probably depends on your playstyle and class, but make no mistake, it can be a real break on performance if drawn with the wrong deck. Which leads us to the halfway point. We're now getting to the really nasty weaknesses now, and at number 5 we have Dendromorphosis. Yes, Dendromorphosis, a basic weakness with the most difficult name to pronounce. This bad boy is a real nightmare to have lurking in your deck. Why? Well, first of all, as soon as you draw it, you lose all your hand assets. So it acts like you've drawn 2 auto-fail Cryptules. Yikes! There goes your machete and flashlight right there. Secondly, if that's not enough, to remove the thing requires either some damage, or at a pinch you can fast action hurt yourself to get rid of it. Now, there are some cases where it can be an asset, for example in a Mystic deck with no hand slots, but for most investigators this is a nasty card. Speaking of nasty cards, let's have a look at number 4, as voted by you, the Tower. Yes, the Tower is a basic weakness that hits you where it hurts from multiple angles at once. First of all, if you draw this thing in your opening hand, you can't mulligan it away, no, which means that you start the game with fewer useful cards in hand. Secondly, its effect is really nasty, which means you really want to play this card as soon as you can, unless you're lucky enough to draw it in the middle of the game and committing cards is no longer a big deal. Finally, to play it costs a whopping 4 resources, which if drawn at the start will mean fewer starting cards and only 1 resource. It can also be potentially worse because if you happen to have another tarot card in your deck, drawing the Tower can essentially remove that from the game as well. Ouch! The Tower spells disaster in tarot readings, and this card certainly lives up to its name. Not a basic weakness you want to have in your deck. Which leads us to number what? Hold on, where are we? Where are we at? Hold on, what are we doing again? I forget. Oh! Yes, number 3, Amnesia. Wait, where am I? Why am I playing this game? Yes, Amnesia has been the bane of lovingly crafted decks since the very start. A weakness that cannot be mitigated and leaves you with almost nothing. Even though you might still have your resources, so what? You've got nothing to spend them on. This is a devastating card at the best of times, especially if drawn early in the game before you've had a chance to set yourself up. Your cards are everything. Literally, without cards to play onto the table or commit to skill tests, you're a husk of an investigator waiting for your hand to refill again. And often there's no time for that, it's too late in the game. Universally feared, this is not a weakness anyone wants to draw, which leads us to number 2. Too treacherous, too deadly, yes, you two are doomed. Doomed. So this lovely card is not one you want lurking in your deck ever. It's a campaign mode weakness, and so the real twist in the tale comes later. Okay, so you draw it, you take a horror and record that Doom approaches. So far so good. On we go to the next scenario where if we draw it again, we then take a cursed fate. On we go, until the next time we draw a cursed fate and we then record that the end is nigh. Gulp. On to the next scenario, whereupon if we draw it again, we swap it yet again for the bell tolls. Draw this bad boy and it's game over. Yikes! Now, it might take 6 to 8 scenarios to get there, of course, but if you happen to play an investigator who's big on card draw, or come across a scenario which has you discarding tons of cards, your doom could be due much quicker than you think. If there is any card to break out the brown trousers, then doom is it. Unless, of course, you happen to draw the most feared basic weakness in the game. This one is voted by you 3 times more feared than Doom. So here we are at number 1 by a long mile, the infamous Overzealous. Yes, Overzealous. How scary is this card? Well, let's break down just how jaw-droppingly awful this card is, especially in True Solo. In fact, for True Solo, I would draw again. First of all, like all weaknesses, you are denied a useful card in the upkeep phase. Then you go to draw an encounter card, which can be no big deal and even manageable, right? Well, wrong, because that card gets surged. Yes, it gets surged, and therefore you're guaranteed at least 3 encounter cards between the upkeep and your next investigation phase. Let that sink in. This means by the time it's the investigation phase again, the team is probably likely to be tipping the table over and suggesting that a nice easy game of Russian roulette with 5 bullets might be a good alternative. This card is so crushingly awful to draw that I'm almost sure that most of us suddenly get a case of amnesia and randomly draw again. If you don't, you're an absolute goddamn legend. And that's it for my top 10 most feared basic weakness cards. What did you think? Did we miss your most feared basic weakness? If so, let us know in the comments, tell us what it is and why. And I'll see you next time. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm Krabby Terror 8, and I'll see you later. Bye!